I mean, basically, what we're about is capturing the history of the village as far as we can. We've done a lot of work on the oral histories. We've done a lot of work on the house histories, so we've got to getting a good view. And there are various pictures emerging that we can use. We've also done the DVD over the year of Jubilee year, and we've got over 5 hours of tape, a film, you know, that's got to be condensed into something that's more palatable, a half hour. So part of the funding is going to go to that. That's quite a major job. So there's all that. We've already mentioned things like the trails and everything, but the key object, as you probably gathered from that bid that we made, is this business about getting some form of manageable archive that's available and accessible. If we can get that, and then we can incorporate within that all the kind of things that you've been doing. We're also
No, I was just going to say,
what I'm doing is offering some technical sort of support in terms of setting this up. So I've set up a blog, which is essentially a web page. It's not as it's not nearly of the sort of scale sophistication of the official Titchmarsh website.
Earlier, you'd be looking at the war memorial.
yeah,
But that's going to be actually quite useful because there's going to be a lot of action in this country over the 100th anniversary, isn't it? Everybody's going to be interested in war memorials, so it'll be quite useful.
I mean, there's, with particular reference to the roll of honour, would the idea be to get a bit of domestic background?
Yes.
Where they lived, who they lived with,
absolutely.
what Dad did, how many siblings,
absolutely,
and
definitely.
that sort of stuff.
What was their life before and after?
Yeah.
I mean, we may be able to...
My sort of little bit of contribution would be looking at Lord Lilford and merchant venturers and how they bought the village.
That's a really important bit.
So that's a really important aspect of our history. One of the reasons we got it was because we were able to say something about links with the school. And we have actually made links through Albin's offices as the chair of government and through Josie. And they've asked us to do, or this is in very general terms, we've done this thing that you know about when we did a presentation on Titchmarsh at war, because to link in with their World War II project.
So the idea is to do a trail, a village trail, pointing out the more interesting things in the village, including, I mean, the church, the war memorial, that type of thing. You know, maybe.
There are a whole range of subjects covered by us. And with the help of the Heritage Lottery Fund, who gave us some money, we'll be putting on another presentation in July and an exhibition towards the end of this year. So before we go any further, I must introduce myself and the team. I'm Sylvia Prestwich. There are 3 founder members of the Titchmarsh History Association who are involved with our core projects. Our current projects are House History and Oral History publications, Titchmarsh 2012 DVD, creating and preserving a village archive, and provision of school information packs.
Archibald was in fact the oldest guy mentioned on the war memorial that died in the First World War. He was 45 years old, which I believe was the upper age limit for somebody to enlist. I'm sure that they served longer than that, but he was the oldest chap who actually died. So what I did was I've sort of skipped back every 10 years looking for Archibald Hicks, and this one is the 1871. Now he was 45 when he died, which means he was born about, I think he died in 1915, so he was born about 1870, and if I can find him on here, can anybody see him? Where is he? He's there he is, 10 months old. So in 1871, he was a little wee baby. and that was going to be his fate, to get to 1915 and die in Flanders. He's actually represented on the war memorial at affectionately called Wipers, but it's in France. So that's basically how you do this family tree stuff. So you go back each generation, and when you pick up somebody like this at 10 months old, they're obviously living with dad. There he is, that's the head, age, and all the rest of it. There's mum, and all the siblings. So I've gone through every name of all the guys up on the war memorial. Well, not so much on the war memorial, from the internet. I've downloaded the Titchmarsh Roll of Honour, and I've worked out there's 27 men in total, which is, if you think about it, I mean, if you were to go into the, to the wheat sheaf on a Saturday night, take out 27 men, and, it's, imagine the effect on a village today, and then look at this village 100 years ago, and it kind of puts it in perspective as to the dramatic, terrible effect it must have had on the, the social structure, widows, orphans, all the rest of it.
The sad part of the story is that a few years later he was discovered on the fields down by the sewage farm, sitting on the gate there. He'd actually shot himself. The disgrace was such that he couldn't take he just couldn't take it. The sad part is, this is rumour, but I think it's some substance. The rumour is that he received an envelope with 3 white feathers, sign of cowardice. He couldn't go. He was in a restricted thing, but all his mates had gone. He couldn't stand the opprobrium that went towards him, and so he actually shot himself. Terrible story.
Right, well I'm going to talk about one of the other people on the war memorial that Fraser was talking about. It's my grandmother's brother, Walter Mabbott. That's him. I'm just going to keep to the very basic facts today. This is Walter Mabbott, who was born in 1899, oldest son of Elisha Mabbott, who was a wood merchant and lived at 15 High Street, Titchmarsh, and Ellen Mabbott. They moved to Titchmarsh from Holcott near Northampton around the turn of the century. Walter had 2 younger sisters, Rose and Edith, who was my grandmother. As far as I know, the Mabbotts, these Mabbotts, weren't related to the other Mabbott family who lived in the village. My daughter Natalie, part of a school trip, visited the battlefield sites of France and Belgium a few years ago, 5 years ago or so. And prior to her going on the trip, we did a little bit of research, and this is a printout from the internet site of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. That gives a little bit of information about Walter Mabbott. It says when he died, how old he was, where he came from, and then, that's where the memorial is. So Walter died on the 22nd of October, less than 3 weeks before the end of the war, just before the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, in fact. We've just got various bits and pieces about him that have emerged. I'll explain where in a minute. This is a newspaper cutting. I don't know from which newspaper or what date, but it sums up the thoughts of the time. In ever-loving memory of Walter, the beloved son of Mr. and Mrs. Elisha Mabbott, Titchmarsh, Thrapston, who was killed in action October 22nd, 1918. Can we go on to the next slide?
His wife, they lived right down the bottom past Joan Woods in the last house, and there was a paddock to that where he used to put his pony.
Yeah.
And wherever they travelled, they used to go with horse and cart.
Oh, did they?
If it was raining, a big umbrella, he used to point the things out at sales.
Oh yes, oh yes. Now, what we wanted to ask Arthur some questions, didn't we, Ian, about what life was like.
Actually, but you know, you were supposed to be with a bricklayer all the time, but Harold was short of men, so he used to send me out doing jobs on my own.
Okay.
And I remember the first house I built was in Glatton, and I was on my own then doing it, building, but he sent Raymond with me for the first time, because Raymond was quite knowledgeable about setting foundations out. So we did it together, and that's how it started off.
Oh, right.
So we started off then working together, and we did it, and built this first house, and then it carried on like that. So before I finished my apprenticeship, I was building on my own.
Oh, I
But
see.
Raymond was with me to start with, and so I could always get a bit of information for Raymond, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I carried on. Then I left Harold's after I'd been there. It was going downhill then.
Yeah.
12 years I'd been with Harold, and it started to go down. He ain't got
Was
any
he not
money.
getting the work? Is that
No, he wasn't getting the work. He wasn't. He would not go and get his money. You know, it was dreadful, really. He didn't seem to. I don't know whether he lost interest or what, you know.
Yeah.
But then he couldn't get materials.
Yes.
And when I was on the rectory, building the new rectory, we were having to come away for weeks on end because you were waiting for joists, timbers, and roofing tiles and all this business.
Yeah.
And I got really fed up with it. You know, there's nothing to do. So I gave him a notice and left.
There are now 102 years worth of parish magazines scanned onto a memory stick. That's from May 1861 to September 1962, and they will be available on the new website very soon. Just got to put them in a read-only format. I thought I'd give you a sample. This is September 1861, so it's fairly new in the parish magazine stakes. Price 1 old penny.
Paupers, the people who hadn't got hardly any money at all and couldn't work, and that's where they lived. This was the poorhouse, where these poor people who didn't have very much money, that's where they lived, and these were the people who helped them. So that is the poorhouse. These days there's nothing like poorhouses. But that's where the poorhouse was, and that house.
It's a rich house.
Where that house? You should know.
Just next to Boris.
Bottom of your road.
Yeah.
Bottom. You know where Mrs. Wisner lives now? At the bottom of your road. Yeah.
I also live by the lane down the.
Very good.
Yeah, you guys.
Very good.
Down there.
Down there at the bottom there was this house. It's been pulled down now. It's completely gone. But that's where the poor people live. So we've seen the rich people. We've seen the poor people. We've seen the servants. We've seen. Do we know a bit more about Victorians?
Yes.
I hope so.
Definitely. I've learnt so much too, year two. It's really interesting because we've been learning about Queen Victoria and Victorian times, but actually seeing photographs from the Victorian times at a place where we know, our own village and our own school, which is so exciting.